Hi everyone, I'm here to do a book review for you today, and this is on Almost Human, the astonishing tale of Homo naledi and the discovery that changed our human history. And this is by Berger, who's a paleoanthropologist who discovered Homo naledi. So before I get into the details of what Homo naledi is and what this book is about, I'll just say that this book is very reminiscent of a book that I recently reviewed back in May, called The World Before Us by Tom Hyam. They're both half memoir, half discussion of new scientific advancements in the field of paleoanthropology. And this focuses not just on the science of what paleoanthropology is, but the discovery of these new fossils themselves, because that in itself is hugely interesting and exciting, especially amongst specialists who live to find these sorts of fossils. So this book was published by National Geographic in 2017. And as I've mentioned, it's part memoir, part discussion of the fossils itself and why they're so important to the field of anthropology, paleoanthropology. So I'll start off with just some brief points about what I liked and what I didn't like. So I liked that, it's exciting, informative. If you're not familiar with any concepts in paleoanthropology, I think you could get by with reading this. He does a great job of explaining key concepts and why they're significant. I think with these style of books, because these are specialists who are writing to a general audience, I think sometimes they can be even oversimplistic, but that's not too big of a concern. I think it did start a bit slow. He starts with his early childhood in Georgia before moving to South Africa to do his to do university studies before relocating there and becoming a researcher. But then it picks up pretty quickly. So Berger, as I mentioned, is a paleoanthropologist. He lives in South Africa, and the place where he lives in South Africa is called the Cradle of Humankind, and it's really like the Valley of the Kings for paleoanthropologists. That area of South Africa, where it aligns with the African Rift Valley, that area is very conducive to finding fossils. So, this area of the world is a really great place to conduct this research. And of course, the hominin species did evolve within Africa, so it's hugely important in the field. So, anyways, I'll just discuss what paleoanthropology is, just to make this, for your understanding. So paleoanthropology is basically concerned with where fossils sit in the human family tree and what they can tell us about the evolution of humans after the divergence with the last common ancestor with, great apes and chimpanzees. So the split between our last common ancestor probably occurred around 10 to 7 million years ago, and this is consistent with changes that were happening in the African landscape around that time, which is called the mosaicization of the rainforests, where the climate was changing, the topography was changing, rainforests were becoming less and less. It was a natural deforestation event, and the landscape was turning into more savanna over time. So this is important to note because this has heavily influenced the evolution of the hominin family tree. So this includes us humans as well as other extinct species which aren't in the genus Homo, but are sort of precursors that aren't necessarily our direct ancestors. But anyways, so what we see in the anatomy and the morphology of these fossils are changes in relation to arms, wrists, hands, the shoulder girdle, to support, and also, of course, in our legs, feet, and pelvis. which show a general trend towards bipedalism, obligate bipedalism, as they were coming down from, not adapted to an arboreal lifestyle as much. As we go further down the evolutionary chain, particularly with the evolution of the genus Homo, so that includes Homo sapiens and our direct ancestors, we see an enlarging of the brain case of the cranium. So there are some of these other precursors that I've mentioned, not necessarily our direct ancestors, but we are related on the hominin family tree, or species like Australopithecus afarensis, and this species is particularly important because it's one of the first examples that we have of a species that is an obligate biped, meaning that their main method of locomotion was walking upright on two limbs. Although they did retain some other primitive features for climbing, so we see longer finger bones, longer limbs, and the girdle, the shoulder girdle, is also conducive to arboreal locomotion and knuckle walking. Is it knuckle walking? Anyways, I'll just move on. So that's around 4 million years ago that afarensis is on the stage. Human Homo sapiens, just for your understanding, doesn't really come on the scene until around 400, and that's really pushing it, around like 300 to 250,000 years ago as an archaic Homo sapiens. So that's just for your reference, just to understand the timescales here. So one of the issues that we do have in paleoanthropology is this sort of assumption that there's this straight trajectory of evolution from the last common ancestor to us. So, bipedalism happens, and then all of the attendant changes in the morphology and the enlarging of the brain case. So just keep that in the back of your mind while I'm explaining why these finds are so significant. So just going back to the book, as I mentioned, this is a memoir. So Berger is discussing how him and his son are walking along the landscape near where they live in South Africa, trying to find new fossils. Berger had basically found a new way through the use of Google Maps that you can identify where cave sites are based on where certain trees grow as a source of water. So he's looking across the landscape for these possible cave entrances, and while he's poking around with a colleague, his son runs off into the distance to play with his dog, and he's like, Dad, come over here, I found something. And sure enough, he found a clavicle of this new species that has never been discovered before. So they go back, they do the digging, and this species that they find is incredibly influential and exciting for the paleoanthropological community because, well, firstly, it's a new species, but also because, as I mentioned previously, how I mentioned that there's this sort of assumption that there's this straight trajectory. After bipedalism, we see an enlarging of the brain case. Well, this species, the skeletal morphology indicates that it has a mosaic of features which belong to the genus Homo, which we belong to, but also features which belong to this other genus that I mentioned, the Australopithecines, which are, so for instance, the cranial morphology, the jaw, the teeth, the dentition or the teeth, all of these indicate that it should be human, so Homo, whereas the postcranial morphology, so everything below the skull, the arms and the wrists and the feet in particular, it was attributed to an Australopithecine. While there was evidence for bipedal locomotion, there's also evidence that it was, still adapted to an arboreal lifestyle. So when they finally managed to date this, based on flowstones in the cave where it was discovered, it turned out that it's around 2 million years old, which is very young, considering that other Australopithecines, that I've mentioned earlier, are about 4 million years old. And this is around the time that Homo erectus, one of the first species in our genus, was evolving. So this is why it's so hugely important to the field of paleoanthropology, because it really puts a spanner in our understanding of human evolution, as I've mentioned. So that was the first one that he found. The second one, which I remember everyone in all of my colleagues and classmates were really excited for this find, and watching the discovery as it unfolded, and the excavation. So the next one focuses on Homo naledi. So by chance, as Berger discusses in his book, a student who used to study under Berger came to visit him, saying that he was essentially looking for work, and Berger basically gave him a chance, and said, yeah, sure, go ahead, off you go. The work that he was doing was, not, I think it was spelunking. They were going to go searching through these caves for other fossil finds. And about 4 weeks later, he comes back with some of these other these other cave explorers, and says, we found something really good. And sure enough, they did. And the reason why this excavation is so exciting is, again, this is a new species that they found, but also because of the excavation and discovery itself. So the cave that it was found in is called Rising Star Cave, and that's where this species gets its name. Naledi means star in the local language. And it's so fascinating because the way in which these cavers had to go in, that it was so narrow at points that even Berger himself couldn't actually reach the chamber where these fossils were found. There's this one point in the cave called Superman's Crawl, and it's called that because the cave, it was only about 17 centimeters across, so the cavers would literally have to stretch their arms out and sort of inch their way through to get to these other parts of the chambers. And in order to actually excavate, when they were sending out calls for potential excavators, they specifically said, you need to have these sort of anatomical dimensions in order to do this work, and of course it's very dangerous. So what they had to do when they finally did build the field team is sort of have a command center outside, and as the excavators would go in, they would have to do all the safety checks, and then when they were in the chamber, it was sort of like a virtual supervision of the excavation going on. So that's one of the exciting bits about the actual excavation itself. But again, this is a really exciting find for the field of paleoanthropology, because again, this is a completely new species, and the bones themselves completely confounded and befuddled everyone. So again, it's another mosaic of skeletal morphology that we're looking at. So some of the features look distinctly human, whereas some of the features don't look very human at all. So one of the issues that they had is, because of the location where it was in, they couldn't get a good date to assess where what the temporal range is for this. However, this turned out to actually be a really good opportunity, because it meant that the researchers who were studying the fossils wouldn't be biased in if they had a date, they could probably say, oh, right, well, this is the time range for Australopithecines, or this is the time range for, that humans would have lived. So therefore, because of this mosaic of features, and they couldn't necessarily attribute it to one or the other, not having the dates was sort of a blessing in disguise. So before they had even found a date for this species, what they did is they basically assessed these mosaic of features. So again, The skull was very small, so this individual had a cranial capacity. There were more. I should state that this site has more fossil remains than most other African sites combined. It is such a wealth of fossils, and they're all attributed to the same species, which is important, and I'll come back to that. So the skull, it has a cranial capacity of about 450 cubic centimeters, which is very, very small. But the dentition was definitely human. The hand, I'll show you here, is something very unusual. So while you can see that it has an opposable thumb, the thumb is shaped differently from humans and even other primates, but the wrist definitely supported a precision grip, which is unique to the genus Homo, whereas other primates, other great apes, tend to have a power grip, and that's important for climbing. But the foot itself was distinctly human. The arch of the foot, the positioning of the big toe, that was conducive to bipedal locomotion, obligate bipedalism. So they determined that even though the cranial capacity and the size was of this specimen was very small, that this is this should be placed in the genus Homo. So when the age range came back, after they were able to eventually find, something that they could directly date using ESR on tooth enamel, it turned out that this species is 450 to 250,000 years old, which is incredibly young. Everyone was expecting the dates to come back to be about 1 million years old, at least 1 million years old, based on the mosaic of features that I've mentioned previously. So the fact that this is so young, really, it was hugely impactful in the field because, again, speaking about the straight line trajectory of human evolution, it completely turns that on its head. This is the time when, as I've mentioned, Homo sapiens first comes on the scene. So here we've got evidence of another human that has adapted to the landscape in a slightly different way than Homo sapiens has. So it was just really exciting for that reason. But the other exciting thing about this find is, as I've mentioned, in this cave, it was a very wealthy find of this species. However, what they didn't find was evidence of any other faunal remains, that is, any other animals, which is unusual. So normally when you see them on a specific assemblage, meaning that at an excavation site there's only one species found, that normally means that there was some sort of catastrophic event, or flooding brought the animals in, or it would have to be attributed to something like that. What they did notice is that there weren't any other faunal species, but there also wasn't any gnawing marks on the bones, meaning that they weren't being dragged in or chewed up by carnivores after they were deposited. And what this means is that this is a very strong case, in absence of any other explanation, for intentional deposition by other species, by other Homo naledians, of their dead into this chamber, which is important because it indicates that they had concerns for mortality, care for the dead, things like that. But we can't really say too much about it, other than there's not that many other good explanations for it. It doesn't look like this is a natural death trap like the site where Australopithecus sediba was found, because there wasn't a natural entrance to the top. In order to get through, they had to crawl their way through all of these different ways, and it doesn't look like there were any other previous entrances. So yeah, that was why that was exciting as well. So all in all, I just wanted to explain how much I enjoyed this book, and if any of you are interested in paleoanthropology or with you know, our origins, I would recommend this. I think it's a great read for anyone who's not even got a background in the origins of humanity or an understanding of paleoanthropology. Again, I think he does a great job of explaining it to the general public, just giving you enough to follow this, and you know, maybe it might actually spark your interest to read a bit more about paleoanthropology. So yes, I did enjoy this, and I'll stop rambling on now. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, YouTube. Bye.